Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
And this is Jack from Emails That Sell.
Episode 23.
Today we're going to talk about fake stats and not-so-scientific articles that might be detrimental to your reply rate. We're going to explain three things. First, why articles on the best time to send cold email should never be trusted, especially if they use aggregate data. The three things you must check before believing any cold email stat on the internet. And finally, how to get inspiration for your next A/B test from today's most misleading articles. Yesterday I saw an article that caught my attention. It was put out by Boomerang, the email tracking tool, and the article was titled, "Forget Best or Sincerely, This Email Closing Gets the Most Replies." And they were looking at the sign-offs used and the reply rate associated with it. Basically, they found that ending an email with something like "sincerely" or "take care" doesn't get as many replies as "thanks" or "thanks in advance." In fact, they found almost a 15% difference in average response rate between the email closings that thank people and the rest. So I shared it with Jeremy and I said, hey, take a look at this. And honestly, I'm thinking that for a while, this is an A/B test I need to run, or even this is something that I need to start applying in my own campaigns. But Jeremy cleared something up and brought a good point that hopefully you can get into today. Jeremy, can you share what your feedback was?
Yeah, I find that interesting. When you forwarded me this article, I looked at it and I say, that's interesting. That sounds like an interesting A/B test to do. And you asked me, can you get some stats on that in QuickMail? And I was thinking that this sounds more or less like a correlation more than actually some causation. And maybe I'm wrong, but there's a lot of things that I don't know how they ran their experiments.
So what about the experiment gave you the feeling that maybe we shouldn't take this advice directly?
There's a couple of points. The first one is you have to look at what tool is promoting this article. In this case, this is Boomerang. This is a good tool in order to remind yourself that you need to follow up with an email that you sent in the past. And if you think like that, as a user, you send emails to a lot of different audiences. It could be your friends, or it could be a business relationship, or it could be a cold email. So in this case, if you aggregate all the results, you may actually get the wrong side of the picture. It could be, for example, that when I use sincerely, I don't use that with a friend, so they have less chance of replying. But when I say thanks, it could be that I'm shooting you an email, Jack, and when I say thanks in advance, I'm actually expecting you to reply because, I'm asking you to do something. So it kind of like could be explained that way in terms of what the audience you're contacting. Change your language so that the conclusion is flawed. It's not that, hey, if you change your language and now start using thanks in advance in your business relationship, you'll get more replies.
Boiling that down, it sounds like the difference in reply rate isn't the sign-off used. Instead, the sign-off used is an indication of the kind of email that you're sending. So what's important to take away from this is not necessarily like, don't pay so much attention to the email closing that you're using. Instead, it should be in the back of your mind whenever you come across another article that promises a magic cold email template or a subject line that's going to guarantee greater than 60% opens. It's the same skeptical mentality you should have when you read through articles like that.
It's always interesting to look at the source of the article. Is it a tool provider, or is it the experience of a single user? And then pay attention to how they actually set up their experiment. Did they contact the same audience? Did they contact using a large volume of email? Or did they just send like 100 emails they sent total? And the second point is, what's the goal of the article? Is it for gaining SEO? Therefore, they're going to repeat a word and not really care about the accuracy of the message they try to convey, or is it for a PR move? Do they extrapolate on purpose things and use superlatives and different words to really shock or make attention? Or is it for clickbait? Do they turn their sentence so that it makes you think this is a certain conclusion which is not necessarily correct? Or is it educational? It could also be like someone wants to stumble on a nugget of knowledge, find it really cool, and just want to share it. That's the people I actually like to read from.
Okay, so just a couple things should be kept in mind when you're reading an article that promises cold email success. Take a look at how the test was run. And you're going to want to see that they were sending to the same audience, that the email was exactly the same except for the single change that they were testing against, and who is publishing this article and sort of what's their goal there.
The context is very important. In the article we were mentioning, they were very focused on the reply rate. But the goal of a cold email is not to get an incredible amount of reply, but to get conversation started, which means that if 90% of your replies are go to hell, that's definitely not a good thing to do for cold email. So you also have to make sure that the stats that you're pursuing are actually the one you should be optimizing for your cold email.
It sounds a lot like traditional landing page A/B tests or let's say sales page A/B tests that were popular for a while. It's like, change your call to action button to orange and you'll get a 9% lift.
That's exactly that.
That may have worked for one particular landing page, but doesn't mean it'll help you at all. It's just apples and oranges comparison.
I had an article that says best time for reply rates is sending at, let's say, lunchtime, just as an example. But in fact, they may have aggregated that we have a lot of replies at 9 o'clock in the morning, a lot of replies at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and they basically just get you the average, which is probably the worst time of the day. You have to be careful with aggregates because it may actually represent the wrong picture because maybe one group is answering another way than the other group.
What if I came across a study, Jeremy, that said, based on this market, the best time to get a reply is sending an email at 7 a.m. So what if I said, it looks like they've tested this market a couple different times. Looks like they've gotten the most replies at 7 a.m. Then what's the matter with me just saying, okay, I'm in the same market as them, so therefore I'm going to send all my emails at 7 a.m.?
This is a great question. I think you should definitely use those sort of articles as inspiration for your A/B testing, not take them as gospel. It could be, for your example of the landing page was a great example. It could be that some users actually skewing the aggregation. It's always like the same example about, if you take everyone salary and then you include suddenly Bill Gates, then suddenly everyone's just a millionaire. You have to really be careful about all those parameters. And like you said at some point, you have to test one difference in everything else should be equal.
But that would give them a stat that they can include in a blog post that's going to be shared a lot of times. Right.
For sure. And then they'll get press and stuff like that. That's actually why I'm very careful about QuickMail. I actually don't do those articles because they're really difficult to do in a scientific approach, and it's easy to lure people in fake stats. It's just hard to do real stats and use not correlation but causation.
I want to talk about articles that are helpful, about lessons that you can pull from the right kind of studies and use that to improve your campaigns, not just confuse them. There's, I think, two kinds of articles out there. One kind talks about tactics or the sort of fad or tweaks that can be made in an email that worked in a particular case, but it's very case specific, and in a month, that tactic could be outdated.
Yeah, like the perfect example would be have a different, subject line that is making your prospect willing to click and open your email.
If people sending cold email all of a sudden saw that article and everyone sends an email with that exact same subject line, then a week later it's no longer going to be effective. But the other kind of articles that you can use for inspiration to improve your own cold email campaigns would be more of the strategy changes that occur at a higher level, but I think get you thinking on the right scale so that you can make the changes that will make a difference in your reply rate. So what I mean by that is zooming out, and instead of worrying about the way you close an email or your subject line, it's about the approach you take. So are you targeting the right kind of person? Are you opening with a sentence that grabs their interest? Are you establishing credibility? When they read the email, do they trust you? Those kinds of influence factors can make a difference in your campaigns and should be thought of when you pick A/B tests to run.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I do have a few users that tell me they really love when we are doing teardowns because they got to understand the thinking behind the choices of wording and the approach that people are using when they're writing an email.
I like to think about including some of the brands that you're currently work with to establish credibility. Credibility will never stop working.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The influence factor is important. It's much easier to figure out like, hey, this word got, X% reply rate. But it's much harder to say using authority as an influence versus using social as an influence versus scarcity, contrast, reciprocity, those sort of influence weapons, shall we say. It's much harder to do those sort of analysis unless you're running your experiment purposely.
I have an article here pulled up by Harvard Business Review, and it's citing a study that says being thankful in an email or even just saying thank you so much can double response rates. And they link to a study that dealt with using gratitude in a way to influence people's actions.
That's beautiful. Those articles are really key because they talk about human behavior. And it's really what you're trying to drive with your cold email. You're trying to drive human behavior, the behavior of replying to you, and hopefully make something compelling for them to be willing to go one step further with you. Rather than actually, what is a trick you could use? How can you trick someone into replying things? When you're studying the tactic and the tactic go away, well, you're kind of lost. But if you're studying the strategy, you can create an infinite number of tactics. Let's take one step back. You read this article and you wanted to try to see if it works. Is there some stats that are meaningful to get, in your opinion?
You are your best source for A/B test data and information on what's going to get you higher response rates. So if you're lucky enough to be in a market with thousands of prospects, then every week or so that you're running tests, you should be able to make smarter and smarter decisions on what kind of emails you're sending out.
Look at, for example, your different campaigns and then just try to draw a conclusion and try to verify your hypothesis. An interesting approach as well is to try to disprove your hypothesis. So if you read this article and your hypothesis is like using thanks in advance is getting you a better reply rate than, sincerely, then go ahead and then try to use sincerely. Try to disprove your hypothesis here.
Just bring with you a skeptical eye when you are coming across these articles. See how they might influence your next A/B test, and you'll be sure to continue to move the right direction as opposed to getting swayed by the mountain of articles out there.
Well, there you go. We learned that stats are meaningless without first understanding how the experiment was run, which explains why rushing into conclusions for your own campaign may actually be detrimental to your own success. Also, seek individual A/B test results of companies with another agenda than educating you. But don't rush into applying their findings, as it's very unlikely that you'll share the same audience and message. Instead, use it as inspiration for your next A/B test. And finally, invest time in studying strategies like human behavior psychology rather than tactics like what's the best word to use. So you won't have to keep looking for the next tactic when that one fades away.
Hey, cold emailer.
Yeah, you.
If you got some value from this episode, give us a high five by sharing a 2-sentence review on iTunes.
Or Stitcher or TuneIn. That works too.
It's a quick way to help other growth-minded folks like us find this podcast.
So they can send awesome emails.
And make everyone's inbox a better place. Thanks.